you mentioned some folks are viewing this as, oh, it's just Smoot-Hawley round two, right? But you very clearly said, no, I disagree. I think that the setup for that is actually, or the setup for this is actually very different from what we've seen in the past. So maybe can you walk through what you see maybe differently than other folks in industry?
Okay. So when we see Smoot-Hawley, a 1930 policy, you're looking at a completely different systemic backdrop in the financial system and international trade, and then also where the other parties are at um, relative to the U.S. dollar and the U.S.'s own sovereign debt situation. I think also to go deep here, we'd have to do like a 1 to 2 hour breakout on the 1920s, the credit bubble, the stock euphoria, the policies that stoked it, and then the pullback when the gold got pulled as Weimar Germany, or got pulled from New York and moved back to Europe as kind of the Weimar hyperinflation started to stabilize. There's a long history to go through there, but just for the the most important drivers of the situation, you start with where is your credit bubble, and then where is the sovereign, and you can look at things that are very similar in the current situation to, if you just want to foot 1 to 1 with Holly Smoot, just enough to be dangerous, but then ultimately your predictions will be missing some key variables because you didn't actually, like, to just go by whatever you learned in your high school U.S. history class and,
Not by
and, foot,
bedside.
and set your investment strategy today to that, that's probably not going to be good enough. Like, it's not going to cut it. But if you just start from, all right, you do have a similar situation to credit bubbles, right? There was a credit bubble that popped in October 1929. Now, what actually happened there was the sovereign bailed out the insolvent U.S. financial system. That's why, Holly Smoot started like it was a Herbert Hoover tenure initiative, as my understanding. It was 1930.
Started in 29. It was
Yeah.
it was supposed to be it was a farmer constituency. It was supposed to be the farmers were getting hit by, I think it was European ag being imported. So they were not able to sell their wares at market. You talked about this before. They started losing their pricing power. They also the value of their land was going down. So it started with one very specifically aimed tariff to protect American farmers. Once it got to the House, they started tacking onto it because, and the story, as I understand, is that Hoover kind of went along with it and didn't push back because the Republican House, the Republican, what do you call it? You look at today's politics, the Republican body, electorate, voters were strongly protectionist. So all these members of Congress started tacking on, oh, well, we should do this. It ended up getting to, I think, 20,000 different goods. So it started as one, and it ballooned to this massive protectionism thing. And actually, Hoover did have pushback from a bunch of people, but he didn't have the political capital to veto it. So anyway, sorry, that's an aside.
So what happened was you have similarities in that there was a credit bubble in both situations. In the Holly Smoot situation, it had popped, right? It was done. The system was deflationary at that point, and then you stacked tariffs on top of deflation.
Yeah.
It didn't work. The ultimate policy prescription that was enacted when FDR came in to pull out of the or start pulling out of the Depression, you saw the government come in, which was at a sub 20% debt to GDP, right? Like a very good balance sheet situation. The sovereign made the decision to reflate the system. But in doing so, it took custody, like essentially, it bought out the gold of the financial system. And that's where you lost the gold standard, right? So that's like the beginning stages of the system, the framework we've really been on for nearly 100 years, a U.S. Treasury debt standard, right? The Treasury debt became your base money, or it started to become the base money of your system, and the Treasury took custody, if you will, of the gold in the system. That's where you saw gold marked up from, was it ever dollar for dollar? Was it $1, 1 ounce of gold? I forget exactly what it was, but at that point, I think he marked it up to like $33 an ounce, and with Executive Order 6102.
35, something
it
like
was
that, yeah.
the silver dollar standard, I want to say,
Yes.
and then gold, I forget what it was before and after. But this is what we're talking about, marking up gold, like you devalue your currency units versus the gold, that's reflation. And in doing so, to get the dollars into the credit system, the Treasury effectively, took possession of the gold, made it illegal for anyone else to own the gold, so that the credit would start flowing freely in the financial system. And you'd start to see the liquidity start to increase and build upon itself to get that deflationary trap resolved, if you will. That dynamic is completely different than what we're seeing today, which is the other side of the coin. It's the evil twin, where you've got an over-leveraged public purse, the Treasury. If you do debt percent held by the public, it's this chart shows it as about 100. That's if you take the view of we owe it to ourselves, and these Social Security claims which we put in, or that all nets out to zero. It's not actually true. The government owes the citizens for those IOUs that they've swapped out, if you will, for the private sector savings through the Social Security forced savings plan. That's a whole different beast. But if you just take the backdrop that we're putting in a tariff policy, similar policy, right? It'll ultimately, in effect, result in fewer dollars leaving the domestic U.S. system. Yes, check, both things accomplished. But the backdrop in the banking and credit situation within the financial system, and then the sovereign debt situation, those are in two different places. The roles are flipped, right? Post 1929, banking and credit was on its back for dead. Like, you had massive bank failures, banks, not honoring deposits, frequently throughout the country. And then you had a government who just came to step in because they had the balance sheet room to fill it in. You've seen over the last, this cycle's been building up for 100 years. But post 2008, what you saw was similar situation where the banks were in a credit problem. Government came with the bailout. They reflated the system with bailouts, infrastructure spending, all of that stuff. But at this point, you've got a U.S. financial system not in, fantastic balance sheet condition, but it's nowhere near to the point you were in 1929 and 30 with that deflationary dynamic and life-threatening type of situation for U.S. banks. That's really not the position that we see ourselves in today. But I would say the U.S. at the sovereign level, the fiscal situation is the exact opposite of where we were in 1930. with a very, going into it, a very conservative kind of management. Post-Civil War, we spent a lot on World War I, but then you had very conservative Congress and presidencies throughout the 1920s. You just had a lot of fiscal room for the sovereign to come in and help. So eventually, with the Hawley Smoot tariffs and all of that, the legacy of those was, hey, yeah, it didn't work because the context of the problem was was set up for it to fail. It's exactly the wrong policy tool at the wrong time. That doesn't mean that this policy tool is going to be perfect or effective, but what it may work. Like history will play out at the specific objectives that it's trying to accomplish. We've talked about some of those. But what we can be pretty sure of is in two different situations, if you use the same tool, it's unlikely that you get the exact same results.